Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by iMazing. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I fell down a really deep Wi-Fi rabbit hole this morning, which has put me a little behind my usual schedule. But I decided that I needed to have fast Wi-Fi in my backyard for the summer because it's gotten finally beautiful here, and I want to see the sun for once.
So that was your decision. It's not like you fell into this rabbit hole. You made a decision to bring this upon yourself.
I did, and it ended up eating up about half of my morning. But
oh God, oh no.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all working fine now, and I've got my setup ready to go. And yeah, so we've got WWC right around the corner, and I thought that today we should talk about some of the apps that are built into iOS and things we'd like to see added for iOS 12, because these are stock apps. Many of them have been around since day one, almost 10 years ago now at this point. And there's still a lot that could be done to kind of tweak them and improve them for users. And I know you and I have kind of a long wish list of things that we'd like to see. So we're going to go through and talk about some of the stock apps and some of the things we'd like to see.
Yeah. And also I wanted to mention that this time of the year, I usually publish my wish list or concept for the next version of iOS. And as you may have noticed, there's no wish list or concept on Mac Stories this year. I want to quickly talk about this. There's two problems that I faced here. The first one is that, if you've been following the rumors, most of the features that I'm interested in, the features that were going to be part of my wish list and if I were to do a concept, those features, according to multiple people, have been pushed back to iOS 13 next year. So things like better iPad multitasking or the redesigned home screen and just new productivity features, which tend to be the focus of my wish list and my concept. And I actually made a decision earlier this year not to do a concept video anyway, because that was going to be too much work. And I've done the concept video for 2 years in a row. And I wanted to just relax a little this time. But I thought I could do a wish list. And then the rumors happened and it just didn't make sense to do a wish list. And also at the same time, I've been focusing on this story that I've been working on. It's a really personal type of story that it took me a long time to put together. It's the kind of article that I don't do often on Mac Stories, but when I do, it absorbs all of my time and all of my attention. And I felt like I wanted to have this story up on the site before WWDC. I wanted to make sure that I could leave with this story that everybody could read up on the site. And it's the type of article that it just deserves all of my attention, all of my time, and it couldn't have been possible to prepare both a wish list and this story at the same time. So for the first time in, I think, about 5 to 6 years, there's no wish list for the next version of iOS. I've been doing this since iOS 6, I think, iOS 5.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long time, and it's a break with tradition, but it's part of the new teaching. It's part of the new, new year, new Federico, new everything. So
all right, well, I can get behind that for sure. And I think this show, while not, I think, exactly an iOS OS type of wish list, these are some of our wishes of, in a lot of respects, the smaller types of things, the small tweaks and things that could make life easier that I'm still optimistic we'll see some of at WWDC this year.
So why don't we start by talking about some of the big apps the stock apps that we want to see improved in iOS 12.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to couple two together right at the outset, and that's reminders and notes.
Okay.
Because those two, when I think of them together, mainly because of the design. The letterpress letters and paper backgrounds, which inexplicably never went away after iOS 6. iOS 7, we saw flat design, bold colors, no borders on buttons, all kinds of things that were a very radical departure from iOS 6. But Notes retained its paper background, and Reminders has it too. And I think it's time to move those a little closer to the flat design. I mean, Notes, they've adopted some of the look that came with iOS 10 and iOS 11 with the Music app and other apps like that and Maps, but they haven't really gone all the way. And I feel like there's a need for that to transition just a little bit more towards the modern look.
Yeah, I agree. It's about time to have a bit of a visual refresh. I wanted to talk about reminders also because I feel the design should also make it easier to create and manage tasks. And if you use reminders, it's the interaction model is really antiquated and it's really slow to, especially if you're dealing with a bunch of reminders that you want to save. It can be really slow to add titles and then you have to tap through to select a date. There's no natural language support and it's hard to add, for example, a comment to a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I would like to see reminders become more of a task manager, but without the complication of something like OmniFocus or Todoist. I would love to see Apple make their own version of things for iOS. I would love to see stuff like tagging, for example. There's tagging support already in Files for iOS 11, and I would love to have this idea of system-wide tagging so that if I have a John tag, for example, for all the things that I need to discuss with you, I could have, a bunch of items in iCloud Drive, but also reminders tagged with John for things that I need to talk to you about. And I would love to have this tagging become this sort of a system-wide layer that includes both documents and reminders and maybe even email messages. And I would love to Apple to do this. And also, one of the features that is missing from reminders and that basically every other task manager does is native file attachments. Why don't you let me grab an image from Photos or a PDF from Apple Mail and save it into a reminder and say, I need to act on this document in 3 days? It seems like something that could be easily done.
Yeah, no, I think that those would be good things to add. I especially would like to see tagging because, if you've ever used Bear, you know how powerful tagging can be. And I've not historically been someone who uses a lot of tags, but it works really well in Notes because, like you said, I could have a Federico tag for things I want to talk to you about, but also give it the Mac Stories tag. And so it would show up in a broader list of Mac Stories things as well as things that are specific to you and me.
If reminders gained tagging support, I think it would be nice to have some kind of smart list or saved search or I don't want to say custom perspective because that's too OmniFocusy.
Too OmniFocus, yeah.
But the idea of having custom views that is not necessarily like a list or a project.
Right. And I think it's something that I think could be used throughout iOS as a way of finding information more easily. It's a little bit more than a simple filter. For instance, if you're in the Files app, you can filter things by date or by name, but you can't save those filters. And it would be nice if you could, even in an app like that, save a search for a particular set of tags and date range, for instance, and say, I want to see all of my Mac Stories tagged files that I've edited in the last 30 days so that I could find my most recent articles that way. That sort of thing would be really neat in Files, but it would also work just as well in something like Reminders, or, we can talk more about Mail. Apple Mail really has not joined the modern email world. And one of the things that you find in a lot of modern iOS email clients is saved searches, the ability to create a folder that includes all of the email based on various criteria. And you see that in AirMail and other places, and it works really well. I'd like to see that come to Apple Mail as well.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, the feature that is referred to as a saved search or a smart folder, Apple has a problem with this feature being Mac only in a bunch of different apps.
Yeah, they do.
On iOS, you cannot create a saved search in Files, but you can in the Finder on the Mac. And as you mentioned, you cannot do the same in Apple Mail. And realistically, I could see how this feature could be brought to a bunch of different apps like Notes, for example. I would love to have a saved search for notes that I created today and that also mention the word iPad, for example. And I think the general sense, and I'm not sure if we're gonna get this type of feature this year or next year, but there's still a bunch of, Apple may call them pro features. I think they are just normal features that are still Mac only and still haven't found their way to iOS. And smart folders or saved searches are a great example of that.
Yeah, because I think what you end up doing without that is you just end up tapping a lot more. You end up just poking around through layers and layers of folders or lists or whatever it happens to be. Another place you see that is with the difference between iTunes, where you can make a smart playlist, and music, where you can't. You can access those, the ones you make on your Mac, but you can't make a complex smart playlist in the music app. And what would be really neat, and I hope that the workflow guys are working on this, I could imagine that these formulas and all these parameters could be designed in a way that's very workflow-like, where you're just taking modules and stringing them together. Here's a date range module, and here's a date last edited module, and you string those together to create your saved searches, and then you can apply them to different applications.
What do you think of Notes? Is there anything else you would like to see in Notes?
Well, Notes, you can create subfolders
right
on the Mac, but you can't in iOS. And I'd just like to have that. I'm fairly happy with Notes. The other thing, I guess, is the tweet previews. We've talked about before on the show that if you send someone a URL to a tweet in Messages, it shows up with a nice preview. So it actually ends up saving you a lot of typing. I was thinking about this the other day. Is like if I send you a link to a tweet, I don't really necessarily even have to comment on it because it's apparent from looking at the preview why I'm sending it to you. But if I just send you a URL that has no information in it other than twitter.com/status blah, 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 then I have to put some context around it so you know why you should be tapping on that in the first place. And I'd like to see that come to Notes, because when you're scanning through a bunch of research material you've done, it's not very helpful just to have a bare Twitter link.
I think it's also interesting how, for example, if you look at apps like Bear, they are using tags, but also elements such as checkboxes to allow you to filter different types of notes. And I would love to see Apple sort of copy this feature in that allow me to have a set of shortcuts to say things like, show me notes that have to-dos in them, or show me notes that have, links or screenshots in them.
Right.
So the idea of having this kind of more powerful search that understands the contents of a note, not only if it contains a word, but what type of element is available in the note. Because I see tons of people using Notes as a task manager, basically.
Yeah.
They just make lists and they make, with the checkboxes and they use it as a reminders alternative, which is actually even worse than reminders because it doesn't have like native reminders or push notifications. But people use it that way because I think they are intrigued by the free-form approach that you can write down something and then there can be an image, but also it can be a checklist. I don't know about a lot of people. I see a lot of people using it that way.
I do too, and it reminds me a little bit of Task Paper, because Task Paper is like that. It's it's plain text, but it has a lot of features layered into that plain text where the app is aware of what is a task and what a due date is, and you have the different tagging methods and so forth. It's the same kind of idea of surfacing metadata in a useful way to users, whether it's creating saved searches or filtering or creating tags and organization systems and something like Notes. I guess tagging or metadata is probably an overarching theme for us this year. Thanks to iMazing for sponsoring App Stories this week. iMazing is a full-fledged iOS device manager for the Mac that expands what you can do with your iOS devices. You can access all of the data on your devices and quickly sync music, photos, documents, and files over Wi-Fi or while connected to your Mac or PC. To give you an idea of just how powerful iMazing is, I had an app with data in it that didn't sync anywhere when I got my iPhone X. I set up that iPhone as a clean install, so I normally wouldn't have had access to that data and it would have been lost. But with iMazing, I was able to dig into the app bundle, find the file that had the data in it, and transfer it to my new phone. It was fantastic. iMazing is also an advanced backup tool. Unlike other tools, you can pick from a wide array of backup options, including external drives and even a NAS. And unlike iTunes and iCloud backups, iMazing preserves backup history so you can restore to different backups. iMazing can even encrypt your backup. There are loads of other advanced features too, with new ones being released all the time. For example, you can download IPA files for your apps from the App Store to your computer. And iMazing 2.6 is just around the corner and will add access to Safari data like browsing history, bookmarks, and reading lists. The update will also add calendar support, including browsing and exporting to HTML, Outlook-compatible CSV files, and iCal formats. What's more, iMazing is available on the Mac and Windows for just one license that activates both platforms, so you only have to buy it once. Try iMazing today with no strings attached. All backup and app management features are 100% free, and if you decide to purchase, we have an exclusive limited-time deal just for App Stories listeners. Listeners of this show can get 30% off for a limited time by going to imazing.com/appstories. Thanks again to iMazing for supporting the show.
Do you want to talk about photos?
Yeah, we should talk about photos because I think photos has really suffered from a lack of meaningful family sharing in it.
Yes.
We saw, I don't recall when family sharing got its big update. It was probably 3 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah, it was a while back.
Does that sound right? Yeah, it was a while back. And I felt like at the time, wow, this is really good. This is a nice first step. There are still some limitations to it. One of the big ones being how photos are shared. And I thought maybe that would be the follow-on, maybe a year or so later. But we haven't seen it. And so it would be nice, as I know you put in the notes, to be able to share any part of my photo library with someone in my family. So probably it would make sense on maybe an album-by-album basis. You could do the whole library, I suppose. But maybe you just want to share photos from a vacation with someone in your family. And share that without having to put together one of these albums that is shared via iMessage, and I think those are lower resolution if I recall correctly. I just want the album to certain albums in my photo library to sync with my wife's photo library, for instance, and she'd just get them automatically without me doing anything anymore with that.
Right, and I think this is something that Google Photos gets exactly right. The idea that you can either share an entire library if you're okay with that idea, or you can have Google Photos say only share pictures of this person with this other person. So like if you want to share pictures of your kid with your spouse, and you can make sure that you have a common set of photos, that is possible. And I think taking this one step further, you could do things like, for example, in my case, I only want to share pictures of our dogs with my girlfriend. And that is not possible right now unless I manually go in every single day and add those photos to an album and then share the album with my girlfriend. I mean, Photos has the ability to detect animals and dogs specifically. And I think we have seen how Google can even detect the same dog as it grows over time, which is crazy. But machine learning can do this type of stuff now. And it can even differentiate between different dogs in a family, for example. I would love to be able to say, this is Zelda, this is Ginger. Make sure that you share photos of my dogs with my girlfriend without me having to care about sharing as a process on a daily basis. As soon as I take a picture and you recognize that this is my dog, share it with my girlfriend. And I could do the same for locations, for example. I could do things like, whenever I go to California, make sure that Sylvia also sees these pictures. And that is totally possible, whether you aggregate metadata from my location or, you recognize a specific landmark in a picture. Better ways to automatically share photos in a family sharing environment without having to do the entire thing manually, which frankly, it just sucks when you have to do it manually.
It does, and I don't know that I'm so confident in Apple's machine learning at this point that it would make some significant mistakes with that, which is why I suggested maybe on an album-by-album basis, but even that is fairly manual because you have to kind of remember to go through and say, all right, well, I'm going to dump all these pictures into this particular album, and those are the ones going to Sylvia or whatever. So it would be nice if it was based on machine learning. I just don't know if we're going to get there. We've already got family iCloud storage. It's a shame that storage, which individuals in a family are storing their photos in, there's no way to get those photos from one person to another easily. And it just feels like a barrier that has to come down at some point in the near future.
I would also love to see an easier way to create fun animations or those little effects that you can apply to live photos in iOS 11. And those are kind of, they're kind of tucked away and not a lot of people know about them. How you can, for example, reverse a live photo or create an animation. I would love to see a better, more intuitive interface to create these effects, but also just more effects and more animations and more. I think Google has been doing an excellent job with stuff like motion stills, for example, and having this integration with Google Photos. The Apple Photos app is fine, I just think it could use a bit of fun. Just let me modify my photos, because people do this anyway when they share to Instagram stories, for example, when they share to Snapchat, they apply all of these custom effects because they want to make their pictures look more fun and prettier. So why not give them a way to do this in the Photos app? Instead of, you could say, well, Apple does have a solution for this and it's called Clips.
Right.
And sure, but it still crops your stuff to a square, and it's a separate app that you need to download from the App Store. And I think Google Photos is showing how if you can give people the tools in the main app that they're using, and if you make it easy, and if you even suggest animations, because in Google Photos you have the assistant that recommends different styles, different types of animations. I think that's much more effective than saying you can kind of do this. You can kind of do this if you go to the App Store and download a separate app called Clips.
Yep, I agree. Let's talk about Safari, because Safari, I think, is one of the better apps on iOS. I love Safari, but there are some things, and there's always room for improvement. There's always things you can add. I just have a couple, and I know you've got a few more, but I wanted to talk about, I was thinking about this the other day because I was using my Mac, and then I switched over to my iPad. And on the Mac, if you close a tab, you can hit Command-Z and the tab comes back with the full backwards and forwards browsing history attached to it. So if you get a little too aggressive in closing those tabs, which obviously I'm not aggressive enough in closing my tabs, but I'd still like to be able to undo them when I go a little too far. And you can't do that in Safari on iOS if you have a keyboard attached. I'd like to see that added.
Yeah.
And, keyboard shortcuts, I think, as a general matter, the more keyboard shortcuts available, especially with an iPad with a keyboard attached, the better. But the other thing is a download manager. We've talked about this before. We both go to iCab when we need to download something. And so I've always got that installed on my iOS devices, but I'd rather not. I'd rather be able to just, long press on a file or a link to a file that I find on the web and then have it automatically download to like a downloads folder in files. And then I can move it around from there.
Yeah, I agree. I also need to use iCab just for that. There's 3 different suggestions or wishes that I have for Safari.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is just an easier way to manage content blockers. You still need to go to settings and then Safari and then enable content blockers one by one. Whereas I think it would be much, much better if you could do this contextually within Safari. As you're browsing a web page, you could see what content blockers are active and what exactly they are blocking. I would love to see more interactivity and integration between enabling the content blocker and what you actually see in Safari. Also, for better or worse, Apple with mobile Safari forced web developers to adapt to touch screens and to touch devices. But the reality is that 10 years later, there are still so many websites that as soon as they detect a mobile browser, and this is especially problematic on the iPad, which has got a big screen, but it's also a touch device. So I'm often in the situation where I can see the full website, but it doesn't work properly because it's a touch device. It doesn't have a mouse cursor.
Right.
I don't know what Apple can do here because I don't know what the correct terminology for these web features and APIs is, but there should be a way to make Safari fake itself as a desktop browser for those situations where you need to use the website of your bank, for example, or some ugly and old government website that doesn't work with a touch input. There should be a way for Safari to help you with that. Instead, I still need to use stuff like iCab or what's the name? Dolphin of the other? No, Penguin? Why do they keep choosing animals?
It's Dolphin, I think. Oh, there's also a Puffin browser, isn't there?
Puffin has got the penguin. Puffin is the bird/penguin, I think.
Okay.
They keep choosing animals for these browsers. I mean, there's also Firefox. Why did they keep choosing animals?
I don't know.
Anyway, I need to use these third-party browsers that come with like fake trackpad modes.
Yeah.
So that I can use these desktop websites. And I think it's something that Apple should figure out. Like, let me use the G Suite web apps from Google on my iPad with Safari. Why is that not possible? I don't know. But I mean, Google is not budging and all these other companies are not budging. So maybe Apple should do something.
Yeah, it's a problem with a lot of different web apps. I mean, I suffer it every week when we do the newsletter in MailChimp. You can't do that on an iPad.
Exactly. And finally, I really like Reading List in Safari as a lightweight read later type of product, but I have some requests. I would love to see, again, tagging. Let me tag articles for different topics, or let me organize them in folders. This is something that Instapaper does excellently, and I would love to have the same ability in Reading List. Even just to have an archive folder when I can permanently archive my favorite stories. I have a few stories that, even though I read them once, every once in a while I go back to them and I read them again because they inspire me, because they are great stories. And there's no archive feature in Reading List. Once it's marked as read, it's gone forever. Yeah, I would love to have like a more permanent archive. Also, full text search. This is currently not available. Even though Safari can extract the text from a web page and show you the text with Safari Reader, you cannot search for that text. You can only search for the title, for the headline of a story. And finally, a text-to-speech Siri mode. I would love to have Siri read me the stories that I save in Safari Reading List. You can probably fake this if you select the entire text of a web page and then use the accessibility features to let Siri read to you. There should be like an easier way. Like I imagine there could be, I think Instapaper also has this, or Pocket maybe, like a native text-to-speech mode where, for example, I'm cooking or I'm doing something around the house, just let me put my AirPods on and let me listen to a story as narrated by Siri. I think that would be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice. I mean, I think that's a fairly narrow use case for a lot of people, but you're right. Those other apps do have that, and I've used it once in a while, and it's fun. Okay, Federico, I know we have a grab bag of other things we'd like to see, and so we're just going to kind of run through them real quick in rapid succession, going back and forth.
Okay.
One that I've wanted forever is handoff for the music app and for podcasts, so that when I am out on a walk, listening to my iPhone, I can come in the house and have the music or the podcast or whatever it is continue automatically on my HomePod, my Mac, wherever. And that's not really possible. I mean, yes, AirPlay, but I mean true handoff where it's a little more seamless than that.
That's a great one. I will mention new types of views in the Files app. So like on the Finder on the Mac, you can choose between columns. And there's also, I don't remember the other, there's 4 views that you have on the Mac. On iOS, you have 2. You have grid and list. I would love to have the same options that I get on the Mac. Because I'm really I'm a fan of the, I guess it's called the column view on the Mac.
Right.
The one with the three columns.
Yep.
Oh yeah, you also have cover flow on the Mac still. For some reason. No, I would love to have the column view. But also, better sorting and the ability to save views. If you look at the Finder, if you open any location in the Finder on the Mac and you look at the top toolbar, you will see all the options that you have. And you don't have the options. You don't have the same options on iOS. And I don't understand why. Because it's a file manager. And people use iPads manage files in the same way that people use Macs manage files. So there should be a common set of settings.
Yeah, I use the list view most of the time. And what's nice about list view is you can set up the different fields. There are a total of 9 options. And you can sort by multiple ones at the same time, which goes back to our beginning discussion about metadata and the ability to sort through lots of information and files. I'd like to see more of that come to the app too.
What else do you have? I see something about TestFlight here.
Yeah, TestFlight. This one is probably doesn't go too far beyond the two of us, but TestFlight tends to get a little crowded, and I'd like to see the ability to search, because a lot of times I go back to TestFlight in order to find the release notes about things that are changing in apps that we cover, and it can be hard to scroll through that long list. TestFlight can also, its scrolling is not the smoothest sometimes, and it's maybe just because I've got so much in there, but it's a little jerky, which makes it even harder to see what you're scrolling past unless you go really slowly. So I would like to see search.
Yeah. And my final one would be a new design for the Home app on iOS. I know that you care about this, John. You wrote a story about the design of the Apple Home app.
I do.
I think it's time to have a better separation between different types of devices, different types of scenes and other controls, more icons, more color, more interaction. Everything right now is either rectangle or a square. And there's no way to, for example, if you want to hide a hub or a bridge, those are, you cannot hide them even though they are not actual devices. They are mixed with all your light switches and thermostats and sensors. just more control, a better, more intuitive design. And I think Apple should take a look at just all the different types of devices that exist for HomeKit these days and ask themselves whether it makes sense to make everything look the same. I think it was fine probably 3 to 4 years ago when all the smart devices that we had were lights or thermostats. But now there's just so much variety that I think it's time to have just more icons, more color, different design, make everything more unique and true to the device that you're actually using. So again, we don't know if all these changes are coming this year. We don't know the extent of the changes in iOS 12, because if you listen to the rumors, apparently everything is coming next year. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, but I don't know if all the things we talked about today will make it for iOS 12 in June.
Yeah, no, I doubt that we'll see all these things, but there must be a reason why we're going to San Jose in June, Federico. So
I hope so.
I'm optimistic that we'll see some of this, and as well as a bunch of other neat stuff. So I think that's a good place to stop for this week.
Yeah.
Thanks again to iMazing for sponsoring the show this week. You can find Federico and me writing at Mac Stories and for Club Mac Stories. Federico is on Twitter. He's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.